If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What is a paranormal experience you've had? My family has a cabin next to a lake in Vermont that we spend time at in the summer. One night, while sleeping in the upstairs bedroom, I hear what sounds like someone getting up to go to the bathroom. It was coming from right across the hallway outside my door, so I assumed it was my mom, usual occurrence. Oddly enough, no lights went on and no bathroom noises. The sound of footsteps just stopped. A minute later, I had this odd feeling that someone was standing at the half-open door to my bedroom, watching me. This feeling went on for minutes until all of a sudden the feeling of someone standing by the door turned into the feeling of someone standing directly over the bed. For the next 5 minutes, I had the terrible feeling that someone/something was looming over me with their face mere inches from mine. The 5 minutes or so seemed to last forever. Suddenly, as soon as the feeling started, it abruptly ended. No retreating footsteps, no noise at all. Whatever it was just gone. The next morning, my family and I are eating breakfast at the table and I still couldn't shake the feeling. Then my sister spoke up and asked, "Mom, what time was it that you got up to go to the bathroom last night? I could hear you up and walking around from the downstairs bedroom." Confused, my mom said that she never got up last night. My brother laughed and said, "Mom, we all heard you." Then my dad piped up and said, "No, your mom never got up." I didn't either. That's when I shared my experience. Freaked everyone out. No one ever believes me when I tell this story, but whatever. Back when I was in early 2000s, I went to Mexico with my ex and his family. We went 18 hours into Mexico to visit his sister's in-laws. When we got there, it was a weird experience for me because I'm black and most people in their town had never seen anyone non-Mexican in their entire lives. To say strangers were interested would be an understatement. The third night I was there, I awoke to a feeling I was being watched. I turned over and saw an old Mexican woman staring at me, but not in a malicious way. More like curious or amused like everyone else. At first I thought it was my ex's Mill since we were staying at her house, so I called out to her in Spanish but she didn't answer, and after a few moments, I realized I could see through her. Eventually she walked out the room and I tried to shake it off and go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The next morning I told my ex's sister what happened and she says, "Oh, you saw her?" I'm like, "Pardon the fuck?" And she goes on to tell me that while she's never seen La Vieja, her husband has a couple of times. And the last time he saw her, she almost led him to his death. She tells me that one night a few years ago, they were once again visiting his mother and staying in her house. In the middle of the night, her husband wakes up to the feeling he's being watched. He sees a woman that looks a lot like his mother standing in the doorway. He calls out to her, asking why she's awake at this hour, but she doesn't answer. Instead, she walks out of the room and eventually goes outside. Half asleep and in a trance, he follows, calling out to her again and again with no answer. His mother's house is located in the valley between two mountains and is so isolated she still draws her water from a well in her front yard. So, my ex's Bill is following this woman thinking it's his mother and eventually follows her outside. He runs after her and sees her jump directly into the well. Panicked, he begins to jump in thinking he is saving his mother from drowning. But the moment before he jumps in the well, he fully awakes and realizes there's no splash and the water at the bottom was completely still. If he would have jumped in, he would have drowned. They have no neighbors and everyone else in the house was asleep. No one would have heard him scream for help. Needless to say, I packed my shit and went home early. When I was around 13, I started getting a bad feeling around our house. There were certain areas I refused to go into and I was terrified to close my eyes at night. I was always a nervous child, but this went far beyond that. There are a few incidents of note and I'm going to share them in the order I remember them in. I was having a Skype call in my room with a friend and at some point I left the room with the video chat still on facing a somewhat shiny section of my bed frame. When I came back my friend looked shaken. I asked him what had happened and he explained that he'd seen a face pass by in the reflection while I was gone. We checked to see if there was any way to move the camera to where it showed his own face and we couldn't find one. While looking for a game I'd lost, I went up into the bonus room of our house. For reference, this was a room above the garage disconnected from the rest of the house except through the narrow laundry room. I hated going up there. In most cases I refused because it gave me the most horrible feeling. Some of my friends said even just going into the laundry room made them uncomfortable. After searching for a few minutes I lost my nerve and went to head back down the stairs and get out of there. As I was heading down the stairs I froze, an icy feeling in my gut, and started to turn around. Before I felt the distinct impression of hands on my back shoving me. I just barely caught the handrail before I went tumbling and ran out of there like a bat out of hell. After the previous incident, I decided to put a line of salt down in the laundry room. I figured it couldn't hurt and it'd be a good test to see if anything was actually happening or if I was just spooking myself. I put the salt down and then the very next day the feeling of dread had already dulled throughout the house. I could relax, at least somewhat, and the stuff that had been happening stopped. Until I came home one day and the feeling was back worse than it had ever been. My parents had hired a cleaner who had swept up the laundry room. I was terrified of what might happen next, but couldn't bring myself to get that close to the source again. Not long after this, I started getting the same feeling I got from the bonus room in my own room. I could feel it coming distinctly from one corner of my room. I don't know how long it was there, but eventually I got used to it. I thought again that maybe I was just scaring myself. One night I laid down and closed my eyes, and after a little bit, as I was starting to drift off, my body tensed. I couldn't move or open my eyes as that feeling from the corner of my room got stronger and stronger. I felt a dip in the bed at my side and for a moment nothing happened. I thought that maybe if I pretended to be asleep whatever it was would go away. And then suddenly the feeling of hands was back and around my throat. I couldn't breathe, but I also couldn't move. My lungs burned, tears were rolling down my face, and I could feel myself starting to pass out. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I didn't move a muscle until I finally fell asleep. The next day when I looked in the mirror, there was bruising all around the front and sides of my neck. I was grateful wearing collars was my thing so that no one was suspicious about me wearing a thick one for a week until the bruises were gone. I threw salt absolutely everywhere in my room after that. I live outside the village of Caledonia in southeastern Missouri, on the border of the Iron and Washington counties. This is an area that's steeped in history with plenty of Civil War history as well as being built right on the northern route of the Trail of Tears. The town of Caledonia itself has plenty of old buildings said to be haunted, but the majority of some of mine and others close to me experience happen at the Caledonia Wine Cottage. I'm not going to go through every bit of history on the place, but the haunting of the place are the typical shadow people, footsteps, and the like. Currently my grandmother owns the place, and runs some small business out of it as a wedding venue/bed and breakfast. So I've spent plenty of time there both during the day and at night. During the day it's like any old building built in the 1800s, but with its little bits of uniqueness. If you go to the top floor you'll find the cutout of the door from when it was the quarantine room of a Civil War hospital, or the bars on the basement when it was used as a temporary jail. It's at night though that things tend to get active. You'll hear footsteps on the stairs, find stuff moved around and all that jazz. Now my personal experience was back 2 years ago. Usually we'll host events like music and such. This time we were doing a St. Patrick's Day Civil War murder mystery. I had volunteered to help as an actor for the event and to wash dishes. Anyways, after the event I was in the kitchen with the cook, a family friend, and had turned to ask her how her day had went. It was when I had turned around to talk to her that plates went flying off the shelves across the room as if someone had thrown them. I won't lie and say it didn't startle me because quite frankly it did. I've had other paranormal experiences but this is one that wasn't easy to explain. Well, when I was about 15 we went to my friend's house. We lived out in Minnesota at the time and they lived out in the country. Well, it was nice outside and we decided to sleep outside. Mind you, this piece of land and the house itself was over 100 years old. She had a bunch of animals such as chickens, snakes, dogs, cats, and goats. Well, right at sundown all the animals stopped making their usual noises and there was no wind outside. Me and my friend didn't think anything of it so we just kept on exploring the place at nighttime. We went to the creek but we heard something walking in the water. We ran home to find someone laying on the trampoline that me and my friend were jumping on not 10 minutes before we left. The figure just laid there. I felt like it was looking at us. My friend turned on her flashlight to see the figure better, but nothing was there. So we made camp for the night right next to their house. We had a hard time falling asleep for we were too scared and the house was locked up. We talked for a while and played some cards, then we started to hear the springs move from the trampoline. We both looked at one another and looked out of the tent. There was a figure of a boy, hold what seems to look like a dagger of some sort. The flashlight made him disappear, but he kept coming closer. Me and my friend ran to try to get to the third-story window so we could make it safe. We found a way in by climbing, and we told my friend's mother that there was someone outside. She came back in and told us that there was no one outside and that it was just the chickens. The chickens were in the coop when we were in the tent. We planned on just staying at my place from now on, for that was way too freaky for us. When I was a young child, 7 or 8, I lived with my father and his girlfriend. We never had any weird occurrences in our area. One night my older cousin came to stay with us because of issues with her family. Everything was normal for about a week. One night though, I was sitting in my room playing my Xbox, as usual for young me. And my cousin was in the kitchen. A few minutes later she came running in the room, practically breaking down my door, and said, "Hey, I think I saw an angel outside." Now, I was convinced this was some sick joke or prank, which was normal for us. So naturally I went to go see for myself what was bothering her. It was pitch black in the house. And as I was heading towards the kitchen window it became progressively more alarming seeing someone as old as my cousin holding my back for comfort. Looking outside, there was nothing. And I laughed it off. Until, on the way back to our room, both of us heard a loud bang from the laundry room. We were in the living room. And you could see the laundry room through the kitchen. We assumed it was someone else in the house. Until, and it still haunts me to this day, a very slender black shadow appeared around the laundry room corner. And slowly peeped out in a very eerie moving way. Adrenaline rush. I scream at her to run and we both book it through the house. And I did the one thing you aren't supposed to do, I looked back. This shadow was coming for us, quickly. Moving at a disturbingly steady pace. But fast enough to alarm you. When we got to my door I screamed to open it. And then she stopped very suddenly and told me, "The door is locked." Neither of us had locked the door. A couple seconds of banging the door. Until I looked behind me to see where this strange figure was. And I have never regretted something more. This figure was directly in my face, as though it was hunched over staring into my eyes. It did nothing but I had the gut feeling it was about to strike. My heart practically sank to my feet in fear. As I had heard of shadow people and such from others at the time. Just then my door suddenly burst open and we both fell inside and instantly slammed the door. And we cried for help. My father burst in and helped us up. Eventually everyone in the house was searching for intruders and any sign of damage. I was convinced it was some sick prank. As my father was very fond of horror and scaring me as a joke. But nobody in the house saw that thing except me. Even my cousin was running too fast to bother with just a peek of it. To this day I still don't know what I saw. But it was never mentioned again. But one thing is certain. I never forgot. I grew up in a house built in the late 1800s. Not terribly old but some history to it. I had some odd experiences. I hated the top of the stairs, especially at night. If the light upstairs was off and I looked up, I always had an impression of 3 women standing at the top, arranged as if they were witches around a cauldron except without the cauldron. My parents wrote it off as kid imagination but it went until I moved out at 18, and a couple times I saw them as kind of see-through shapes when the light was on. Family cats were not a fan of that landing either, and I often saw one cat, Marbles, hissing at it. For the second one, a bit of explanation. Upstairs was a big rectangle with a stairwell along one wall. Directly at the top of the stairs was my parents' bedroom, and running parallel to the stairwell was 2 bedrooms, then the bathroom at the opposite end of the stairs facing my parents' room. My bedroom was in the middle, but I was terrified of my closet because I often saw a small shape scuttle out. Imagine the girl from The Exorcist spider walking, except an indistinct shape instead of a girl, of it across my room and out the door. So I would go sleep with my sister beside the bathroom. One night after I braved running to my sister's room because the black shape was scuttling around, the bathroom light turned on and my sister's closet door opened on its own. The black shape started scuttling from my sister's closet to the bathroom, then down the hall and back into the closet over and over. I started screaming and my mom came, but thought I was having a nightmare. She turned off the light, closed the closet and went back to bed. As soon as she was gone it all happened again. This went on for 3 or 4 hours. Each time my mom left, the closet door opened and the light went on, and the black shape went haywire. My dad and sister slept soundly through it all. Interestingly, my sister, who is a light sleeper normally, never woke up when the black shape was harassing me, no matter how much I screamed. I would have odd nightmares on the nights the black shape was active, about being in an infinitely large, black, open space and of large things like mattresses but different shooting towards me in this vast space. But they all stopped as soon as I moved out. I went back a couple years ago during an open house and chatted with the owners. They were moving out because their youngest daughter was too scared to be there. She doesn't like the black doggy cloud that lives in her closet and gives her nightmares of being small in a really big place or the ladies that wouldn't let her up the stairs. When I was a child, 6 to 7 years old, my mom made friends with a very frugal born-again Christian couple with a little girl 3/4 and baby boy 4/5 months. The couple themselves were friendly but odd. They would humbly boast about donating most of their money to a TV evangelist. The mom was a homemaker and would spend hours comparison shopping to save a few dollars, mostly bought generic, etc. They lived in a 2-story house but only had one phone downstairs because they wouldn't pay for an extra line. The stairs and hallway had light bulbs in every other fixture, to save money I assume. It had one of those light switches that could turn on at the top and off at the bottom. This is important. One day my mom, my sister and myself are visiting and my mom and the lady go grocery shopping. My sister and I got sent upstairs so they don't have to turn the lights on downstairs. Not a lot of toys upstairs and boredom quickly set in. Everyone is napping but me, and I'm playing with the Noah's Ark animals and such, trying to not be too loud. Eventually it's dark outside and dark inside, and I'm hearing noises from downstairs. I turn on the hall light and quietly make my way down the hall, turn on the stairs lights. The stairs were shaped like a U with the only lit lights being at the top and the bottom of the stairs. When I get to the stairs, I yell down thinking it's my mom, that she was back, I just didn't hear her come in. I definitely heard something downstairs, so I go down the stairs. There's no lights on downstairs, and it seems really, really dark. I hear a voice from the kitchen, and I call out again for my mom. The voice tells me to come here but something about it is scary and I don't want to go into the dark. Instead I stay on the bottom step, hold onto the handrail and hang into the living room. I turn myself towards the kitchen and call out again for my mom. Again the wrong voice and I realized it was coming from a spot in the kitchen that is abnormally dark. As in darker than the dark around it. I know something is wrong. I run up the stairs and I can feel something is behind me. I get to the middle of the U and the stair light turns off. I'm not in the dark because of the hall light but I'm in shadows. I'm half running half jumping up the stairs. I run into the hallway, lock myself in the bathroom. I'm crying and very scared. I even wet my pants. After what seems like forever, my mom and the lady finally came home. I got in trouble because of all the lights being on. I tried to explain to my mom and her friend what happened but they wouldn't listen. My mom is so upset and embarrassed by my behavior that she has my grandpa come and get me and take me to his house. At his house, my grandma can tell that I'm really upset and after a late dinner she asks me what happened. I tell her everything. She tells me she believes me and I don't have to go back to their house again. She told my mom, and my does not believe me, but my grandma made my mom promise to tell her friend to have her house blessed. I don't know if it ever was though. Several months later, my mom has a dream about a gray oily smoke traveling up the stairs and going into the baby's room. In her dream the entire room is filled with it. She calls her friend and after many rings she hangs up. She tells herself she was being absurd and goes back to bed. Later that morning, my mom gets a tragic phone call. The baby was dead from crib death and the mom had to be taken to the hospital. My mom made me go to the funeral and the mom was mean to me. Her and my mom didn't stay friends for much longer, and eventually they sold the house and moved away. The ongoing joke in my family is that we come from a long line of witches. So anyway, my great uncle has these dreams he was going to die before his junior year of high school and it would be a family member that killed him. So the summer before his junior year him and his brothers are out for a summer drive, in a convertible, in the 50s with no seatbelts in the back of the car. The older brother took a turn to hard to fast and rolled the car. They all lived except the youngest brother. Then when they were going through his notebooks after his funeral they found drawings of the church which was several towns over and he had never been there so thus never seen it. He not only knew he would die but a family member would kill him and even drew the right church. So my grandma, who was devastated by the loss of her baby brother, got into the occult, trying to talk to the dead, and then weird shit started to happen around her house. One day while sitting on the sofa she got cold and started shaking and she swears Jesus showed up and took her to hell to show her the path she was walking down. And when she snapped out of it she became super religious. Now fast forward years from the 50s to the 90s, I'm sleeping in their house and I hear growling and I wake up and see 2 dogs with red eyes staring at me, just big black red-eyed dogs. My own dog was on top of me growling back, just this little Sheltie staring down these demon dogs. At first I was like I'm dreaming, this is a dream, and then one bit me and I started screaming and my dog jumped off at them. My mom came running in and was like, "Who bit you? Why is your hand bleeding?" And I was like, "Where's lady?" She chased them away. She was found in the basement growling at something under the steps. Every time I stayed the night it would happen. Even after my grandpa passed away and there were no dogs in the house I would see them. I think even my kid saw them cause she started just screaming at the top of her lungs, and not a normal baby cry, but like a dying animal. I called my husband in a panic in the middle of the night and was like, "The demon dogs are still here, I can't sleep here, I'm getting a hotel." I talked to my grandma about it and she confirmed after her dabble in the occult she also started seeing things and was attacked in her sleep. She fully believes she cursed the house. I walked into my friend's house the first time and just arm hair stood up and I got a sick feeling in my stomach and asked if something was up with his basement, and he looked at me shocked. Yeah, there's a nursing home next door. I think the portal to the afterlife is in my basement. Whenever someone dies my cats go down there and form a circle and shortly after medics arrive at the nursing home. How did you know? I used to be attacked by shadow dogs in my grandpa's and grandma's house as a kid. I had the same uneasy feeling when I walked in your door. His wife had also been attacked in her sleep at his house shortly after they moved in. She was screaming and he tried to shake her awake and he said it felt like something was pinning her to the bed. She was 110 pounds and he is this army vet in good shape and he couldn't pick her off the bed. At that point all the animals started to attack the bedroom door. He could hear their dog ripping apart the wood and his cat screaming. He said she lifted off the bed and then slammed down and woke up. She had handprint marks on her arms in the morning and no one is sure if it was him trying to shake her awake or the thing that attacked her in her sleep. My family moved into a somewhat older house on a large lot of land when I was 7. We had the most wonderful Akita at the time, a breed well known for protecting its family. My dad traveled a lot, so my mom would often be home with just us 3 kids and the dog. One day we get home from wherever, and Pluto was at the top of the stairs to the basement growling. You have to understand, growling was incredibly unusual for our dog. As my parents knew he was going to grow up into a big boy, and Akitas can sometimes be aggressive, and large, powerful, and potentially aggressive are a horrible combo, they went through extensive training with him. I can only remember one other instance of him growling. He refused to go down there. Also abnormal. We let him out of the basement to go potty multiple times a day. My mom naturally feared someone had broken in, so she made me, my older brother, and my little sister go sit in the car with 10-year-old brother in the driver's seat, telling us if she wasn't back in 10 minutes to leave and find somewhere to call the police. This was before cell phones. She ventured back into the house with a knife. Came back out a few minutes later, and hadn't found anything. So we went on with our lives. Many years later, once I'd reached adulthood, my parents revealed to us that someone had previously hung himself in the unfinished portion of the basement, where the laundry room was. My poor brother's room was in that basement. When we lived in that house is when he first began to have issues. He's now deceased after many years of drug addiction. I'm fairly convinced that house was haunted. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I awoke from sleeping at random. It wasn't for a bathroom break or anything of real purpose, it was just this random urge to walk outside of my room. Being pretty disoriented at this point due to how abruptly I woke up, I shuffled out of my room into the hallway, and what I saw at the other end of the hallway is still vividly imprinted in my brain. Down at the end of the hall, there was a white, mist-like figure in the vague shape of a woman in a tattered dress floating towards me slowly. Her eyes were totally devoid of any color and the expression on her face was very puzzling, like she wasn't aware that I was looking right at her or something. I was completely locked in place because of the level of shock I was in observing this. I had never witnessed anything like this in my life. I didn't know how to digest it. I wanted to scream but I couldn't. I wanted to run back into my room but I couldn't. I just stood there and gazed for what felt like 10 minutes but was probably closer to about 30 seconds or so. I mustered up the strength to take a step forward to get a closer look as the figure turned its head off to the side to look, seemingly, at something else while it continued slowly coasting down the hall. And as my foot hit the carpet, the figure abruptly stopped floating and stood straight up and shifted its focus onto me, which sent a rush of pure terror down my spine. I immediately darted the 10 steps or so back into my room and under the covers, hoping to God that the "it can't get you under here" concept was true. Luckily for me, nothing happened after that and I was eventually able to get back to sleep after my heart rate returned to normal. But, that experience always resonated with me. I never saw that figure ever again in that house. We never had any other paranormal experiences of any kind, that I am aware of, there either. But, I remember telling my friends about it and a few of them mentioned that they had weird things that happened to them too, and it really inspired me to want to learn more about ghosts and paranormal things to help make sense of what I experienced all those years ago. We used to have a lesbian couple as neighbors in our apartment. Julia was the alcoholic and her girlfriend Nicole was the more responsible one. We started hanging out and eventually had a barbecue in front of our apartment and invited all the neighbors to get to know each other. Julia showed up drunk and somehow ended up in my bedroom and locked the door. She came out and I walked her home while Nicole finished eating. Once we got to her apartment, Julia started crying and said she was being attacked by something. She lifted her shirt and said she wakes up with scratches, bruises and burns on her stomach. I saw them. She was so incoherent I couldn't understand how she got them. I asked Nicole about it when I got back and she turned white and said they did a seance to talk to her sister who had committed suicide. And she didn't think they were talking to her sister. Because shortly after, Julia was waking up with marks all over her stomach. That's it, that's how it was left. I went back home and checked my bedroom to see if she did anything in there. As soon as I stepped in, my head hurt so bad I had to lie down. It made me physically sick. Later that night, after everyone left, he walked into the room and instantly had the worst headache of his life. The next morning I woke up and I had a blister on my chest. The next day my husband got a blister in the exact same spot. It was weird, sure, but we didn't even connect the two together. It wasn't until the next day. We were sitting on the couch and behind that wall was our bedroom. Against that wall was my makeup vanity. I had an angled mirror and behind it was my glass jar with cotton balls. While we were watching TV we heard a loud thump in our room. The jar somehow managed to go around the mirror and fly halfway across the room. There is absolutely no way possible for this to happen. I can't explain it, but trust me, it can't. My husband and I looked at each other and freaked out. It was at this point we realized something weird was happening. My good friend, who has a supernatural podcast and show, said evil spirits can follow people into other homes and attach themselves there. She was convinced this girl left something in our room so it could stay attached to us. We searched and found nothing. I was terrified, and when my husband worked nights, I would stay at a friend's. I couldn't be home alone. My parents drove up and brought some holy water, a Bible and a rosary to bless our apartment. Before they could do this, something happened to my husband. He was putting on the sheets to our bed with the ceiling fan and light on. All of a sudden the lights went out but the fan stayed on. My husband thought I was pranking him, then realized I was in the living room with my parents. He started feeling cold and got chills and ran out totally freaked out. We had changed a light bulb a few days prior. It was strange they both went out at the same time. My husband also distinctly heard the light switch. But the fan and light switch only worked together, not separately. My parents went around our apartment praying and throwing holy water everywhere. After they did this we all felt a sense of peace. I can't explain it. I keep trying to tell myself it was all in my head, but I honestly don't think it was. I think something was in our home. I had a lot of paranormal experiences, so I'll tell the most recent. My younger sister had a notebook where she drew some things with crayon. One day I decided to look at and I found a draw that was a really weird looking face and below the drawing said demon. After that I took her notebook and hid it. Some days later more draws were on it, but this time it was a draw of my whole family hung up saying Mom, Dad, Grandpa, Martu, me, and it in bold Vico, my little sister. I hid it again and after some days again it was written help me. I didn't care and did the same, hide it. That thing was written saying help me or there will be consequences. Then I written inside it who are you, what do you want? My soul to late. I written it joking because I thought it was my sister. I gave it to care of Undertale, then passed some months before I realized it wasn't my sister, because when I went back of the beach with my family the notebook was in my nightstand. I creeped out and I opened it. That shit was threatening me about killing my little cat. I was really mad, but that night couldn't sleep thinking about what will happen to Keanu, my cat, and a week later I burned that notebook. Nothing happened after that. This might be mildly interesting, but anyway. Once I had to do a night shift in our company's new building, because our server broke down and had to be fixed until the next morning. We had recently moved to a 250-year-old farmhouse, which we were renovating to use as our new office. It was summer 2014 during the Soccer World Cup and we had watched the German team playing an afternoon match, had a barbecue. And no, I wasn't drunk, I had just one beer. After anybody had left, I began to work on our server, had to change hard disks, both RAID disks broke, and install the system from zero. Close to midnight, I sat in my office on the first floor, installing SQL. I had left the office door open and the downstairs door to the yard as well, to get some air during this hot night. You have to know, no one can enter the yard/company property, because it is closed with a huge wooden gate, like 4 meters high. Except for some cats, that seem to find a way sometimes and stroll around hunting mice. First I heard a rustling noise from outside the yard. There were some garbage bags lying around, so I assumed an animal was searching for some goodies. It kept on rustling for about 1 or 2 minutes, then it stopped. I thought nothing of it, until I heard footsteps inside the house. I froze and listened. Outside of my office, it was all dark, including the stairs leading up to the first floor, ending up almost exactly beside my office door. I heard 2 more footsteps, coming up the stairs. I turned my head to the open office door and just yelled hello. Again, I listened closely but never heard a thing again. When I finally took a look, There was nothing to be seen in the staircase. So I finished my work. Server was running as the guys came in the morning. I brushed it off and went home. Forward half a year later. I had a meeting with my boss who had meanwhile moved into the farmhouse. He lived where our offices had been before, which went in another part of the property. The farm is big, it has basically 2 houses, stables and a barn. After the business talk, we had a small chat, in which he talked about living here and finally said, "I think this house is haunted." He said it without any irony or humor, which struck me, because my boss is as down to earth as anyone can be and doesn't say things like that without making a joke. I asked him what he meant, and he told me he keeps hearing footsteps in the house, especially in the staircase. This really made me shiver. When I was probably around 4 or 5, I woke up in the middle of the night and did my usual routine of getting into my parents' bed. When I went in their room, I went to climb in the bed and looked over to see a man standing there. I couldn't make out features, he was just a shadowy figure, dressed nicely, and he made me uneasy. I quickly got in bed, he lingered for a bit and then left. Now, I know that sounds like something a kid dreamed or eyes playing tricks, but when I told my mother the next day, she seemed very interested in the man. I learned when I got older, that my mother and her sisters had been visited by a shadowy man as children. It happened multiple times, and multiple sisters saw him at the same time. He was much more threatening to them. He would loom over the bed and say things. When they were younger, they told their parents about the man. Their parents were also interested. When my grandfather was younger, he was also visited by the shadowy man at night. He was also threatening and scared my grandfather. My great-grandfather owned a church and store in Portugal, and one day after my grandfather saw the shadowy man, everything in store was smashed. The church was also vandalized. My grandfather believes it was an evil spirit or curse that visits my family. I haven't seen the shadowy figure in years, but I think of him every so often. When I was a kid, I was big into hunting paranormal stuff with my friends. I had 2 friends who I would investigate with. Let's call them Jerry and Petra. One day, Jerry tells me about something that happened to him. He had made a makeshift Ouija board, and he ended up contacting a ghost named A. We were all curious, and wanted to know more about this ghost. And having the most items for safe spirit contact, we decided we'd use my Ouija board to contact A again. We set up a salt circle, candles, and lavender around the board before we start. We didn't have any sage. We start the session, and things immediately go wrong. We all get a feeling of something watching us. Something evil. It's not A. We asked who it was, and the ghost responded with T. We asked what it was. It responded with proxy. Looking up a definition, we learned that he was a proxy for someone else who wanted contact, and it wasn't A. It was something much darker, but we didn't know what. Suddenly, we hear a loud bang coming from a closet. Jerry and Petra leave to check. I stay behind, not wanting to take my fingers off the planchette and accidentally end the session without saying goodbye. They both come running back screaming. Petra says that they saw a black figure with tiny white eyes sitting on the floor in fetal position, staring right at them. We all freak out and end the session. We go upstairs to get holy water, and when we come back, the planchette, which had been taken off the board, was now back on the board, and all our protective stuff had been thrown everywhere. The candles were out, thankfully. Subsequent sessions reveal that A comes in darkness and T comes in light. So we'd always keep the lights off whenever we had a session. But what was chilling was that we learned that T was trying to drain our essence, and A was trying to protect us. We also learned T is specifically targeting Jerry and Petra. They shared a last name, but weren't directly related, but he'd somehow gotten tethered to both of them. We all saw the black figure a few more times. It showed up standing outside our houses, looking in our windows from the street. We also saw a white figure with black eyes watching us several times. We presumed that it was A. I also got persistent feelings of dread whenever I entered the basement closet. Eventually, we get the house smudged and the sightings stop. I haven't used a Ouija board since. I grew up next to a state forest, so the woods were never scary to me. They were my backyard. I thought the Blair Witch Project was stupid and boring because I've been lost in the woods at night before, and I was fine. The sounds of rustling leaves and animals were familiar to me. But then one day I had a creepy experience in a supposedly haunted forest. I was in Maryland for my best friend Julie's graduation from Salisbury State University. Nearby is the Pocomoke Forest, which is rumored to be haunted by everyone in the town. Julie heard all sorts of stories about it at school, and related them to me, but I didn't really believe them. The night I got down there I ended up meeting a friend of hers who I'd never met before named Norman. He and I hit it off real well, and after Julie kicked us out of her room to talk on the phone with her boyfriend, Norman, and I walked all over the campus talking. When we finally wandered our way back to the dorms, I told her I was going to drive Norman home. Only we didn't really want the night to end, so we decided to go parking. Norman suggested going out to Pocomoke, about a half-hour drive. I was curious, having heard about it, and Norman said he knew the forest real well, since he was a local boy. So we drove on out there, and after meandering through the twists and turns of the forest for a while, I finally got tired of driving, and decided to stop. Norman said to put down the windows, to check if it was an okay place to stop. I thought this was odd, but I complied. Now comes the creepy part. It was dead quiet out there. I mean, not a sound. Total silence. Then, I heard something that sounded a lot like footsteps coming towards us from behind the car on the dirt road. I looked at Norman, he looked at me, and I think we both looked spooked. I was like, "Do you hear that?" Before I even finished the question, he was rolling up his window and yelling, "Go, go, go." So I turned on the ignition and floored it. After some frenzied driving, Norman said he knew a place that was okay to stop at, and he guided me through several turns. This time when we rolled down the windows, you would not have believed the racket out there. Crickets, frogs, katydids, whippoorwills. It was very unnerving after the complete silence in the part of the woods we'd been in before. I don't know what was out there when we stopped the first time, but something was definitely off. That's all I can say. You know how in the movies, people in the forest will stop and note that it's too quiet just before trouble starts? Well, that's really the way it is. My advice to everyone, if you are in a forest at night, and it's noisy as hell, don't be scared. All those sounds are normal. It's when you can't hear anything but your own heartbeat you should worry. Well, this happened in Mexico, specifically in a little town in the mountains where my parents were born and grew up in. It was my third time there, and there have occasions where weird things have happened, such as things falling or lights going off. Anyway, this happened in the summer of 2019 when me and my two younger cousins, we'll call them John, whom is 12, and Ali, who is 10, slept in the same room. I was awake at 2 in the morning cause there was more service at that time, while both my cousins were asleep in the bed next to me. I was on my phone when there was banging on the windows, but the weird thing is that I heard banging from all around me. The windows were made out of glass and there was no wind that night, and usually there's a light turned on, but there was no shadow of a person or animal. Even if there was, the dogs would bark, but they were sound asleep. Anyways, when I looked, the windows were shaking, and I looked at my cousin to see if she woke up, but the room was so dark I couldn't see. So I motioned just in case she was awake to be quiet. In that moment it felt weird, like I had a bad feeling, my heart was racing, so I decided to pray and close my eyes. When I woke up it all stopped and I just knocked out. The next morning I asked my cousins if they heard it. Ali said she was awake while John didn't hear a thing. In the other room was my uncle, and I asked him if he heard anything and he said no. Everyone in the family said no, that they heard nothing. 2 weeks passed by and it's only me and John in that room. We're on our phones when in the kitchen and living room, things start to fall. Nothing broke, but it was strange and the room just felt so off and felt like someone was watching us in the shadows. I eventually just prayed and knocked out. Nothing really happened after that, but I still find it strange and I really want to know what happened that night. Got any ideas? I used to live in Colorado and drive back to Arizona to visit my family a few times a year. Often I would break the drive up into 2 days, opting to camp, hike, and explore the deserts and canyons of Utah instead of sitting in the car for 12 hours. It was right around 10 p.m. I would say, and I was kind of stargazing after dinner in this cool little canyon that was supposed to be home for the night. I don't really know how to describe this, but I saw this rippling blackness coming directly at me at high speed. If something could shimmer and pulse the color black, is kind of close. As it passed through me, every hair on my body stood up and I instantly went cold. Needless to say, everything was thrown back in the car and I hightailed it out of there. After an attempt at sleep a few hours down the road, I drove through the night to my mother's house. It was incredibly frightening and it's super hard to explain what I saw. It could have been a moonless night, or the moon hadn't come up yet, but it was very dark in that canyon. A strange black undulating form, that somehow I could see against the darkness of the night. It was like the darkness of the night had coalesced something that had serious malice. It filled me with dread. I have never returned to that spot. When I was around 7 to 8 years old, I had gotten up for school. It was really quiet in my house and I went to my parents' room to wake them up. They weren't in bed, so I went to wake up my brother. He wasn't there either. I just went downstairs to check all over, but I couldn't find them. I was a little nervous, but I just went to my room to get ready. When I was going through my dresser for clothes, I heard someone whistling downstairs and thought it was my dad, so I called out to him. No answer. I went downstairs again and the whistling was getting louder. I called out to my dad again, and the whistling stopped. Then I heard my name being called from the laundry room. I figured this was just a normal thing, so I looked down the hall to the laundry room and saw someone standing there. They were too short to be my parents and too tall to be my brother, so I didn't know what to do. I yelled out something like, "Hi friend." Still not sure why I said that. The person at the end of the hall tilted their head and started waving me over. I slowly started walking towards them. When I was about 5 feet away, they stepped towards me. I held out my hand and they took it. I couldn't feel their hand in mine. I was suddenly slammed into the wall next to me. I started screaming. The person disappeared, but I felt something hit my head and started screaming louder. All of a sudden my parents rushed towards me asking me things like, "What's wrong and why are you up so early?" I asked them why they weren't home and they ignored me. They just led me back up to my bedroom and told me to go to sleep. When they left my room, the person I saw before was at the end of my bed. I waved at them. They screamed "wake up" over and over again until I just passed out. My parents have been acting weird ever since that night. And I can't figure out if this reality is a dream or not. Sometimes I still hear some distant voice telling me to wake up. When I was 4, I awoke to what I saw as a green man. Another time I woke up screaming saying the boy took my nose. The phone would ring with no answer. Alarm clocks would shriek even after taking the batteries out. My parents had a priest come bless our house. He came out and told us we needed to move. We moved shortly after and we've never experienced anything else in our new house. My father was friends with the people he sold the house to and gave them warning about the occurrences we experienced. Similar things happened to them, telephones ringing with no answer and alarm clocks ringing without explanation. 1 year ago I was asleep in the living room when a loud noise awoke the rest of my family. My mom ran into the living room and into the kitchen to discover a single plate broken in the middle of the floor as if someone took it out the cupboard, walked to the middle of the kitchen and dropped it. We don't keep plates out on the counters. Nobody else was awake. The strange thing is that I was the closest one to the kitchen and only awoke when my mother shook me to tell me what happened. I used to never think about this until that plate situation happened. It feels like whatever was haunting me at the old house has followed me and broke that plate to remind me I can't get away from it.